What's going on, everyone? This is DerekJ Speaks, and today we are talking about AEW Full Gear 2023 live from the Kia Forum in Los Angeles, California. A show from top to bottom that was very strong, had some really good matches, some really good action, some very good storytelling in different parts of the show, a very strong pay-per-view for AEW. I wanted to say that up front because I got some thoughts on certain things that happened on this show. Mainly, the basically show-long storyline centered around the AEW World Champion MJF heading into the big main event match against Jay White. This story started on the buy-in pre-show where MJF and his surrogate tag team partner, Samoa Joe, successfully retained the Ring of Honor tag team titles against the Guns. After the match, the Guns attacked MJF. Now, I failed to mention Adam Cole, the same Adam Cole who blew out his ankle a few months ago. He came out, he appeared, and he provided a distraction for the Guns, which led to them losing. Joe shook hands with MJF. Of course, they have their deal. Joe left. After the match, MJF got attacked by the Guns. They Pillmanized his leg with the steel chair, and they were selling this big knee injury for MJF to the point where he got stretchered out of the arena and out of the building, out of the Kia Forum. While he was being stretchered, while he was going away, Adam Cole was right there behind him. Adam Cole on crutches, of course, still very much legitimately injured. MJF was yelling and pleading with Adam Cole to make sure they do not take that championship away from him, away from MJF. And Adam Cole promised that he would not let that happen. This led to later on in the show, I believe there was a segment right after the opening match where Tony Schiavone was out on the stage, brought out the referee, brought out Jay White, and he was about to announce that MJF is unable to compete in the main event. Therefore, the match would be canceled, and they were about to award Jay White with the AEW championship because MJF is injured and cannot compete. Before Tony Schiavone could make that announcement, out came Adam Cole, who, still on crutches with his very real injury, just coming off of surgery not too long ago, in fact. He comes out and he says that since MJF is unable to compete in the main event tonight, he instead will take his place. The one-legged Adam Cole is going to take MJF's place in this main event on the show. Later on in the show, we hear that Tony Khan has confirmed that the new main event will be Adam Cole versus Jay White, because MJF, who just got attacked on this night, is so badly injured that he is not cleared to compete, but they have no issue with letting a man who just had surgery on his ankle compete in the main event match instead. This led all the way to the main event where they were dragging this out. And I will admit, I let my fandom and my theory-headed self start to play a role here, thinking, what are they going to do here? Surely there's something that they're cooking up here. Obviously, MJF is going to compete tonight, but there's something going on here, and I'm very curious how this is all going to go down. So we get to the main event. Out comes Adam Cole on his crutches, does the whole thing. Jay White comes out there with the Guns in his corner, and they're doing the ring intros. They're preparing for the match. And then we hear sirens, and we cut to the backstage area outside where an ambulance truck is coming into the arena, and it's being driven by MJF, who apparently, on his one leg, stole an ambulance truck. He exits the truck. He is hobbling and limping his way through the backstage area out into the arena, where he comes out, he's getting on the ramp, he's coming to the ring, where he is stopped midway through by a bunch of referees and officials, basically trying to tell him, you don't have to do this or you shouldn't do this. Meanwhile, this whole time, Adam Cole, the same man who just had surgery and is nursing a very real injured ankle, is right there in the ring ready to compete. Bryce Remsburg was seconds away from ringing the bell to allow this match to take place. Meanwhile, MJF is being held back by security. Unbelievable. So MJF gets in the ring and he tells Adam Cole he's good. He tells the referee that he's good. And then the match proceeds. And then we see the bulk of the match. MJF is selling this bum knee injury. He is in agonizing pain. They even had a spot later on down the stretch in the match where Adam Cole teased throwing in the towel for MJF when he was locked in a figure four. MJF was still fighting valiantly, also stupidly. The man was hitting some big moves that should not be hit for someone clearly in his condition here, but he was hitting them. There was one cool spot where he, in one fluid motion, he leaped over the top rope and hit a cutter on Jay White off of the ring apron down onto the floor. That was a really cool spot in this match. It did have some weak spots and some unfortunate spots, though, where at one point they were clearly setting up for MJF to hit Jay White with an elbow drop off the top turnbuckle down through the announce table. Unfortunately, when MJF tossed Jay White onto the announce table, the table collapsed. So MJF proceeded with the spot, but instead it was an elbow drop onto the floor, which actually looked far more devastating than the table spot would have. But in the end, the Guns, they tried to interfere again, but Adam Cole, who was out there in MJF's corner, he presented the Dynamite Diamond Ring, gave it to MJF. Of course, Jay White almost got it. I believe he did and even used it, and that made for a close near fall. But MJF eventually got it. He knocked out the Guns with it. He avoided a Blade Runner, and then he hit Jay White with it, and he retained his championship. MJF is still the AEW World Champion, and he celebrated with his brochacho, Adam Cole. Both men limped their way up the ramp onto the stage, and they faded to black, and the show was over. The match itself between MJF and Jay White was actually good. Selling the knee injury and all that, it made for some very high drama spots, and the crowd was firmly into it. The crowd all night was great. They were electric. They were fantastic. In this match in particular, they were buying into all the near falls, and they were really with MJF the entire way through. They were all along with the story. I wish I could have been there, but I just could not get into the story that they were telling, because you look at it on the surface, and it's like, this story just looks completely ridiculous, that surely something bigger is on the horizon. There's a bigger twist waiting for the end of the show. There's some big angle coming from this on the other side, or somehow something big is going to go down to justify all of this happening. But nothing. They just wanted to play up an injury angle for MJF, and I just found it to be completely unnecessary. The match itself was really good, but it was hampered. It was hurt. It was handicapped, no pun intended, well, actually pun intended, by MJF selling this knee injury. It was completely unnecessary. Or at least if they wanted him to sell the knee injury going into the match, okay, you could have done that. But the whole stuff of him being stretchered out of the building and teasing that Adam Cole is going to take his place, that whole thing was completely unnecessary. I would like to think that maybe on some level it'll be explained later on. There's something, this is just a small part of a story, and this will be further developed later on. I don't know, and I highly doubt it. I just think they were trying to come up with a unique kind of hook for the pay-per-view and put a little spin on the main event, add a few extra bells and whistles to the match that just weren't necessary. MJF versus Jay White by itself was perfectly fine. Jay White stole this man's belt and he's been parading around with it for the last 6 or so weeks. MJF fighting like hell to beat Jay White and fend off all of his cronies and surviving to take the championship back and reclaim his property was a fine enough story by itself. It didn't need all the extra stuff with him having his knee injured and being stretchered out of the building and going to the hospital, and then having Adam Cole, the already injured Adam Cole, take his place, which is just stupid. With wrestling, I get it. I've been watching this stuff my whole life. I know you have to get to a certain point where you just check your brain at the door and you turn your brain off and you suspend disbelief a little bit. But it's just very, very hard to buy into this story that MJF was so badly hurt that he potentially, possibly couldn't compete in the main event. But everyone had no problem whatsoever with Adam Cole wrestling on his behalf. It could have been anybody. Why wouldn't it have been Samoa Joe? Samoa Joe was perfectly fine. Samoa Joe just left after the opening or after the pre-show match. He just left. Why couldn't he have done that? If they were dead set on doing the whole someone's going to step in for him thing, why couldn't it have been Samoa Joe, who was perfectly fine? I don't understand it. And I'm just saying that in terms of that, I still firmly believe they shouldn't have done that anyway. They got Adam Cole on the show. Cool. We haven't seen Cole and MJF on TV live in the ring together in quite a while. And for the longest time, that was the top storyline going in this entire company. It was the best thing going in this entire company. So I understand them wanting to kind of get a little bit of that magic again for one night only. It did not work. It did not work. I'm sorry. The story just did not work for me. It clearly worked for the people in that building because they were going crazy during that main event and they were cheering for all of this. They were booing Jay White. They were cheering for Adam Cole. They were cheering for MJF. All the big dramatic near falls and everything. They were into it. And I got into the match. Like I said, the match itself was actually really good. It was a very well-paced, well-told story in that main event. But just the whole thing with MJF's knee, I found it to be completely unnecessary. And the entire storyline around it, I found to be very distracting. Nevertheless, MJF is still the champion. Jay White lost to a one-legged man. So, sucks for him. He had this whole plan mapped out and he lost. Will he be fine? Yes. He probably should have been protected a little bit better, but overall, I think Jay White will be just fine. This is the first time this man has been pinned since he arrived in AEW, and correct me if I'm wrong, this man debuted in AEW in May. It is now November, and this is the first time his shoulders have been pinned to the mat. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. This is the first time that he has ever been pinned in an AEW ring. He will be just fine. It doesn't make him look strong at all that he wrestled a 25-minute match against a man who was basically crippled and lost. That doesn't make him look very strong, if you ask me, but he should be fine. As for MJF, there's clearly a story set up there with a rematch with Samoa Joe. That was the whole basis for the match on the buy-in, where he accepts Joe's help and under the condition that Joe gets a rematch. So I don't know if that's coming on TV. I don't know if they're going to save it for their next pay-per-view, which is in December 30th. It's called World's End. So I don't know if they're saving it for that. But obviously that's going to be one of the next big things with MJF. There's also still the mystery of who's under the devil mask. We had no appearance whatsoever of the person in the devil mask on this show. There was no allusion to it. The commentators mentioned it a few times here and there, but there was no images, there was no more attacks on this show, so we got nothing. So I guess this will continue on TV. I didn't think for certain that we would get the reveal on this show. They certainly didn't promote the fact that we were going to get a reveal on this show, so I can't be disappointed with that. I just thought we would get some kind of further continuation of that story, but the fact that we got nothing was very strange. Nevertheless, MJF still the champion, and we can move on. Like I said at the very beginning here, the show was actually good. It was very good. It was really good due to certain matches like the Texas Death Match between Hangman Adam Page and Swerve Strickland. Now, we see a lot of these plunder, garbage, weapons, bloody war type matches in AEW almost regularly, almost weekly, if we're being honest. But sometimes we have very few exceptions of matches that are just a cut above, and this was one of those exceptions here because these two had a absolutely vicious feud, vicious brawl on this show. From the moment that the match started, which was in an unconventional way because Swerve made his entrance and then Hangman didn't even wait for his entrance, didn't wait for his music. He stormed right out and he went right after Swerve and the brawl was on. We had a bunch of stuff in this match. We had so much barbed wire. We had glass at certain points in this match. We had a bunch of different weapons from both men. We had staple guns. We had duct tape and staple guns because Hangman was stapling all over Swerve and his face. Swerve's face was just a complete crimson mask. My boy didn't even look black anymore. He looked completely red-faced here with the amount of blood trickling down his face. And at one point, Hangman laid down and just let the blood pour into his mouth. And that was very gross. I let out an audible ugh when I saw that because it was very gross and very disturbing. But the crowd popped huge for it. But Swerve, being the sick, sadistic bastard that he is, he started to get into it, and then he was using the staple gun on Hangman and doing worse to him, and he was even stapling himself because he's crazy, and we like that because Swerve is awesome. The match was really, it just got to obscene levels. So, of course, a Texas Death Match, no pinfalls. It's submission and count out, basically, almost like a last man standing match, essentially. So you had different parts where the ref is counting and you think it's over, but then they just find a way to get back up. This was going on back and forth. I can't even go through every single thing that happened in this match. If you somehow did not see this match, I advise you to go back and watch it, unless you are very squeamish to matches like this or you're just sick of them. Because again, we see matches like this pretty regularly. So if you're just at a point where you just don't get into these kind of matches, I completely understand that. This is not going to be much different from a lot of the other kind of matches that we get similar to this. So, perfectly fine. I will just say that this match by itself, alone, in a vacuum, was actually very good. I did enjoy the story that was being told in this match, and I enjoyed the intensity from Hangman and from Swerve. What I didn't like was the interference in this match. It got to a point where Prince Nana, who was out there in Swerve's corner, at one point when Swerve was down, the referee was counting, he was almost making it up to 10. Prince Nana pulled Swerve out of the ring and got him back on his feet and saved him. I would have been fine if it ended there, but then Brian Cage came out there and he interfered and he started attacking Hangman. And of course, he got beat up, but I just didn't think that was necessary. That kind of took a couple of notches off the match for me personally, because I didn't think it needed that extra element of interference in this match. I thought the stuff with Hangman and Swerve by themselves was good enough to last and stand on its own 2 feet. But nevertheless, it got handled pretty quickly. So quickly, in fact, that there really was no point in it being there other than just giving Hangman an out for an excuse behind the finish. But Hangman did dispose of Brian Cage. He even disposed of Prince Nana, giving him the dead eye off the apron through a table. But then Swerve came back at him and hit him in the back of the head with a cinder block, which completely disintegrated because apparently Hangman is just made of stone and steel, that a cinder block could just completely disintegrate upon impact on him. So there you go. And then Swerve took the Hangman name literally, and he grabbed a large steel chain and wrapped it around Hangman's throat and hung him like a noose up. They were on the outside, so he hung him up by the steel post. Hangman was down. The referee was counting. Hangman almost made it back up around the 8 or 9 part, but he did not get fully back up. And Swerve Strickland got the win. That, above everything else, was the biggest shock of this whole match. And one of the biggest shocks of the entire night is that I did not expect Swerve to get the win here. I thought that Hangman, he's getting revenge. Swerve invaded this man's house. He stood above his child's crib and was threatening the child. And there was a little callback to that in this match early on with the staples. Hangman stapled one of his son's finger paintings. At least that's what the commentator said, that it was one of his finger paintings. He stapled it to Swerve's face. So that was a very poetic moment in the match. But this was all about Hangman's revenge, which he basically got. He kicked Swerve's ass this entire match, and Swerve got his licks in too, but this was Hangman really taking it to Swerve and taking out his aggression and getting his revenge. But in the end, it was Swerve who actually won the match. And I give kudos to AEW for that decision, because that was the correct decision. Hangman, to this audience, to the AEW audience, is a well-established character, a well-established top guy. Swerve is not quite there yet. He needs that help. He needs that extra boost. He needs that extra bit of push behind him to get him to that level that Hangman is at, if not higher than where Hangman is at. And by beating someone like Hangman here, that adds credibility to him. It was just earlier this year at the Revolution pay-per-view that Hangman had another Texas death match over Jon Moxley. And in that match, he got a very strong win over Jon Moxley. That added a lot of credibility to Hangman because of how well established Jon Moxley is. You fast forward all these months later, and yes, there was some interference, and I know that was done to basically protect Hangman. They even had the commentators, they had Taz and Excalibur talking about how Brian Cage and Prince Nana, their interference helped contribute to Hangman's loss in this match. So they were already telling that story. So it wasn't the strongest, most decisive victory for Swerve, but it was still a big victory over a well-established name. And I don't know what the immediate future is for Swerve, but it can only be up from here. It can only continue to rise from here. Swerve is too good to keep down for too long. Hangman will be just fine. He'll bounce into a new feud and he'll still be a presence on the show. Swerve is someone who needs to be in that same position. I don't see how you can continue this feud. I know the babyface didn't win, but I don't see what else you can possibly do with these two men. So, cap it off here, move forward, maybe put Swerve in that Continental Classic tournament that they're doing. Maybe have him win the whole thing. I don't know, but has to be upward movement for Swerve and his push on the show. We also had another kind of plunder match on this show. It was a Fatal 4-Way ladder match for the AEW World Tag Team titles. Big Bill and Ricky Starks retained their titles in a pretty brutal match against FTR, La Facción Ingobernable, and the Kings of the Black Throne, representing the House of Black, of course, Malakai Black and Brody King. This was a pretty crazy match by itself. Had some crazy ladder spots. Again, far too many crazy spots to go into each thing, but I thought the match itself was very fun. Up to that point in the show, this was one of the better matches of the entire night, but I thought very fun here. Both matches took place at a point in the show where another match had to immediately follow them, and best of luck to those matches that had to follow. In the case of the ladder match, it was the triple threat for the TBS Championship with Kris Statlander, Julia Hart, and Skye Blue, and I thought they had a very good match. These three ladies had a very good match. In fact, their match was the better of the two women's matches that took place on this show. This was a far more straight-up wrestling match than kind of the cornball, goofy stuff and stuff that we saw in the Shida Toni Storm match. Here, it was much more straight up wrestling with these three. The crowd was very quiet in the first half or so, but in those closing minutes, they got some good near falls, and the crowd was really getting into it. In the end, we had a new champion crowned as Statlander hit Skye Blue with Saturday Night Fever. Julia Hart basically shoved her away and stole the pin on Skye Blue and won the TBS Championship. So good for Julia Hart. Both her and Skye Blue have both improved tremendously in the ring over these past few months. Julia Hart specifically, though, has improved immensely. I mentioned that the last time she challenged for the championship on pay-per-view, and she was here again, and this time she actually got the win. And she did what her fellow House of Black members earlier in the night could not do, because not only did Brody and Malakai lose, but we had Buddy Matthews losing to Claudio Castagnoli on the buy-in pre-show. So she was the only member of the House of Black to actually win on this show, so good for her. In the other example of a match that had to follow a bigger, much better, more intense match, that being the Texas Death Match, immediately following that was the tag team match between the Young Bucks and Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega. Never thought I would see a day where a match between Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, and Chris Jericho would have a tough time following their previous match, but we had that here. And much like with the triple threat, the crowd was pretty quiet early on, but they did get them back into it. A lot of close near falls. Everyone was hitting each other's finishers in this match, but in the end, it was Kenny Omega delivering the one-winged angel to Matt Jackson to get the win. He and Chris Jericho not only get to continue teaming, but they also stole the Young Bucks' shot, their future opportunity at the World Tag Team titles. They were kind of sitting on that. They put that shot on the line in this match, and now it belongs to Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. After the match, the Young Bucks had a huge temper tantrum, just throwing shit all over ringside, throwing them at the announcers too. So if you didn't think the Bucks were heels going into this match, there's no way they aren't now coming out of it and throwing the kind of fit that they did in that position. So clearly, whenever Jericho and Omega get that tag team title shot, the Young Bucks will screw them over and cost them that match. But we shall wait and see when that happens. I mentioned the TBS Championship match being the better of the two women's matches on this show, and that is true. The other women's match was Toni Storm, timeless Toni Storm, challenging Hikaru Shida for the AEW Women's World Championship. The match was fun enough. The crowd was super into it. Of course, the whole Hollywood stuff with Toni Storm. I love the character. I love the work that Toni Storm has been doing. This character work has been top-notch, and the crowd is firmly invested into it. I just thought as a match, especially a match on pay-per-view, it was not up to the caliber of what I can expect, or what I have come to expect from two talents like Toni Storm and Hikaru Shida. It was a couple of steps below what these two are capable of, in favor of going for a lot of the gimmicky stuff that they did in this match. Of course, Luther was out there with Toni, and he played a factor at different points in this match. But Toni Storm was the one who pulled out the victory, and she is once again the AEW Women's World Champion, 3-time champion, and this championship has once again been used as a hot potato and has jumped to yet another person. Hopefully now it sticks. Hikaru Shida is extremely talented. She is a great champion to have, but Toni Storm is the best character in the entire women's division in this company, if not one of the best characters in the entire company. So having the championship on her and keeping it on her for a while is the smart move. So hopefully that was the intention behind this. The AEW International Championship was on the line. Orange Cassidy defending his championship against Jon Moxley. This is a rematch from the All Out pay-per-view. And this time around, Orange Cassidy did get the win. They were building up the whole story of Orange Cassidy needing to prove himself as a champion, proving that he can beat Jon Moxley. He can stand toe-to-toe with him, bout for bout, bell to bell, match his intensity and all that stuff. Moxley did bleed in this match. Didn't bleed nearly as bad as Swerve and Hangman did in their match later on in the show, but he did bleed here. And Orange Cassidy, it took him a couple of orange punches to take him down, but he did. I think he hit about 5, and then he hit him with the beach break and got the win. So Orange Cassidy is still the international champion, and the show opened with a 6-man tag team match with Darby Allin, Sting, and the rated R superstar Adam Copeland, taking on Christian Cage, Nick Wayne, and Luchasaurus. Of course, they kept Copeland and Christian apart in this match. At different points, Copeland tried to chase after Christian, but they never officially really locked up in this match, which is good. You can hold off on that until we get to the eventual singles match. As it was a fun opener. Christian, of course, he hightailed it out of there the second he had the chance and left his boys to die. In this case, being Luchasaurus, who got ganged up on and got taken down by Adam Copeland, who got the win for his team. And again, this just holds off on the inevitable match between Adam Copeland and Christian Cage. But here, the babyfaces got the feel-good win to open the show, and they paid respect to Sting, who was out there possibly for the last time in LA, and even had Ric Flair in his corner, the newest AEW signing, Ric Flair. Speaking of newest AEW signings, they were hyping up heading into this show that they were going to unveil and reveal the latest new signing to AEW, to All Elite Wrestling, and it was revealed to be Will Ospreay, New Japan's own Will Ospreay, no stranger to AEW. He's competed many a time in an AEW ring, but now he is officially All Elite. At least he will be. He had a little bit of mic time, and he was telling the crowd that they're going to have to wait just a little bit because he was basically being honest here. He has some commitments still left with New Japan Pro Wrestling. To be specific, his contract with New Japan is not up until February. So he has to finish out his commitments and his dates with them. Of course, he is being promoted for the Wrestle Kingdom show on January 4th. So he has to finish out with them, and then once he is all wrapped up there, he will be full-time with AEW, and a big incentive for him is, of course, All In at Wembley in 2024. He competed at All In at Wembley this year against Chris Jericho, but now with him being a full-time AEW star next year when they go back, no doubt in my mind he will be even more heavily promoted for that show, and probably in whatever the main event is going to be. Whatever main event match, show closing match is going to happen next year at Wembley, I'm pretty sure Will Ospreay will be involved. And there you have it. That was the show. Again, overall, I thought it was a very good show. I just couldn't get into everything. Certain things I got into big time, like the Texas Death Match. You know, as good as that Texas Death Match was, it also does damage to that whole main event story, because throughout this entire match, these two men are killing each other. They are beating the shit out of each other and putting each other through just the worst amount of punishment possible. And yet in the main event, everyone is treating MJF like he is just dying when he has this knee injury that just came out of nowhere. Again, not going to harp on it too much. The match was still good. The main event was still good. I just did not dig the story that they were telling. But overall, I did think this was a strong show, not the strongest pay-per-view. In fact, overall this year, some of the weaker pay-per-views that AEW has put on, at least in terms of their more name-recognized pay-per-views, they haven't all been bad. All In was pretty good. All Out was pretty good. Wrestle Dream was pretty good. And I have no doubt that World's End next month will be good. But this was not one of the strongest AEW pay-per-views that they've ever done. But it was still an overall strong show with a very heavily favorited match of the year contender taking place on the show with Swerve Strickland and Hangman Page. But that is it for me. I've gone on way too long about this show. If you like what you saw and you like what you heard, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment down below. What was your thoughts on this show? What was your thoughts on the angle that they did with MJF throughout this entire show? And let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And if you'd like to hear more from me, follow me on Twitter at DerekJ Speaks. I'll be back with you guys next week covering WWE for Survivor Series and War Games. So until next time, check you later.